the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. And that's just what these people are doing. Every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they've got a plan. Welcome back to the Professor Penn podcast on this Tuesday night, the 25th of February, for episode number 186, The Dictator. Lots going on. The news is coming fast and furious because we're in a period of just phenomenal change. And some of the things that are coming forth are being met with more and more resistance from the Uni Party, from the war hawks. There's a lot of news that is not related to war. I mean, President Trump and his team are moving across a very wide battlefront trying to change our country to transform us from being part of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order to a new world order that has yet to be named and is yet to be established. But he's sure going about it. Every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they've got a plan. President Trump came out this past week and called President Zelensky of the Ukraine a dictator. Tanner, good morning. Could you please play number one?
I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died, who gave that life.
He refuses to have elections. It's low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? It's hard to be high. Somebody said, oh, no, his polls are good. Give me a break. Every city is being demolished. They look like a demolition site, every single one of them. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use, yes, sir, to say that he's pretty easy, pretty easy. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast.
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating.
And here's Zelensky speaking in Ukrainian in response to the president. If someone wants to replace me right now, I would say it won't happen right now. In other words, you know, he's a dictator. We're talking about 4%. We have seen this disinformation. We understand it's coming from Russia. We understand that, and we have proof that these numbers are being discussed between America and Russia. So unfortunately, President Trump, who we respect a lot as a leader of the nation that we really respect, the American nation, who supported us all the time, unfortunately, he lives in this disinformation space. I believe the United States of America helped Putin to come out of years of isolation. So we have a clash of street corners. What street corner you're standing on is how you see this thing. And for your host and for this audience, what we've been talking about for the previous 184 episodes, this being episode number 185, we've laid out the case, and we're going to continue to lay out the case that the way the war in the Ukraine is sold to us is steeped in a worldview that I personally don't agree with. And I have, as I've said, some insight into it because my family's from the Ukraine and the first language in my home was Russian. So, you know, when you actually come from the region and you get firsthand reports from people that were born there, it differs a little bit than what you might see in the mainstream media. President Trump is being quite the change is overwhelming for the foreign policy establishment. Let's just leave it like that. What President Trump is saying is that Russia did not start the war. Just this morning as I was driving into the studio, there was a United Nations vote to condemn Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, which the United States opposed. This has got people's heads blowing off their shoulders because this has not happened since forever. So very hard to predict the future for the pundits out there that want to start making predictions. Very hard to make predictions past an event that's never happened. And we get into this, why did the war start? Where did it come from? Well, I've listed this off many times. Britain attacked Russia in Russia in 1805. The French attacked Russia in Russia, burning Moscow in 1812. The British attacked the Russians again in 1853. The Crimean War, a very bloody war. 500,000 Russian citizens died in that war. In 1917, at the time of the Soviet takeover, the communist takeover, Russia was occupied, including by the United States of America. We positioned 13,000 troops in Vladivostok. In 1942, the Germans invaded Russia, almost again, conquering the country, Operation Barbarossa. Then we had the Cold War, and then we had this war. I am not saying the Russians were not running their own empire. I am not saying the Russians didn't do a lot of really sketchy things over that same period of time. I'm saying assigning blame depends on what street corner you're standing on. So just to review the bidding, in 1991, when George H.W. Bush was president, the Soviet Union was falling apart. And there was an alleged meeting that is actually pretty well documented, but contended. And since I wasn't there, which PhD am I going to believe? The one that says the meeting happened and the promises were made, or the PhD that says it doesn't? They're both on someone's payroll. But there is a historical event which has been recorded, which, I can't, you can't, no one that we know can verify, in which it is alleged that the Secretary of State Baker of that administration met with Gorbachev and promised in return for the Soviets ceding East Germany and allowing Germany to reunify, that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east. That was the alleged promise. Well, let's listen to 1A.
As we welcome new NATO allies, we also affirm that the door to NATO membership remains open to other nations that seek it, in the Balkans and beyond. Here in Bucharest, we must make clear that NATO welcomes the aspirations of Georgia and Ukraine for their membership in NATO and offers them a clear path forward to meet that goal. So my country's position is clear. NATO should welcome Georgia and Ukraine into the membership action plan. And NATO membership must remain open to all of Europe's democracies that seek it.
Well, that seems to be fairly dispositive evidence that our government was interested in having a former part of the Soviet Union with a border on Russia join NATO. Obviously quite inflammatory. And we American citizens were not engaged in a political process. We were watching the news, Fox News for most of us at that time. Conservative alternative media was in its infancy when that clip was filmed. And we were watching Fox News and we were captured by the zeitgeist of the times. We were not involved in politics as American citizens. We were allowing our elected officials and the apparatus of the Republican Party to dictate what it is we believe. And that apparatus is still quite functional and quite in control of the Republican Party today. And the elected officials from that apparatus that have emerged from that apparatus are just as captured by the zeitgeist of that time today as they were then. There's just very little change in the apparatus. And we're going to see these neocon Republicans jumping up, popping up like mushrooms, the Roger Wickers and the Senator Cornyns of Texas, and they're going to be standing there with Amy Klobuchar and Chris Coons. The Uni Party is going to emerge, and what they're going to say is, hey, we've never seen this before. We're siding with dictators. What does Putin have on Trump? You're seeing this in the news. Well, first of all, I'm going to say this. If we don't, as American citizens, get into the Republican Party and take control of the endorsement and primary process, if we don't do this, this isn't going to work. These people are all wearing MAGA hats. They're all going to be like a WWE tag team event. On this event, 2 or 3 of them will pop up to pervert the vote, and then they'll put their MAGA hats back on. And on the next issue, 2 or 3 different ones will pop up. What they're going to do, because the margins of Republican uh, control in the House and Senate are so narrow, it's not going to be very hard for these neocon war hawks to subvert the president's program. Like here in CD6, we got Tom Emmer, a virulent anti-Trumper who ran President Trump's re-election campaign or election campaign here in Minnesota. What can I tell you? He's for President Trump. They all are for President Trump now because that is the way for the professional politician to hide. In the words of Vladimir Lenin, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. And that's just what these people are doing. Now, if we would all get into the political process and join our local party, well, we would be able to see who these folks are. We would be able to vote for the true America First candidate and get us out of this worldwide engagement that is wars of discretion over and over again, endless debt, open borders. They all go together. They all go together. Well, now we got a Republican Party pretty much says it got to close the border. How can you close the border when you're running a worldwide empire? It's not going to stick after Donald Trump finishes. It's just not going to stick. This is a short-term reprieve that's giving us, the American citizens, a chance to organize. Follow me on X at Prof. Penn Podcast. I am posting prolifically now, creating material for reposting and for comment. Repost the links to the podcasts. Join your local party. Come to on every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, an X Spaces that I'm participating in that is being led by Dan Schultz. All you got to do is go to X, 8 p.m. Central, at Dan Schultz 2, the number 2, at Dan Schultz 2. This is the only way we're going to get this done. There's no other way to do it. So, if we're sitting here 6 years from now and I'm on podcast 1500 and you see a bunch of constabulary come in here and drag me off the set, thank you very much, okay? Because that's what's going to happen when these communists come back. They're not going to be nice. It's gulag time on the other side of Trump, unless we participate, because we have a republic. We are the most important cog in the machinery of the republicanism. We, the citizens in our local neighborhood, we are the sovereigns. These people serve us. If we show up and make them do what? Fear us. Why would they fear us? We're not going to threaten them. The only threat they face is retirement and being forced to get real jobs, because an elected official doesn't really have a job like you and me. They get to be themselves. They get paid to do next to nothing. Here's what they do. Yay or nay. That's it. Doesn't that sound rough? And of course, if they're the darlings of the machine, it's easy for them to get elected because the machine apparatus supports its own. Donald Trump was the anomaly. He beat the machine. That's why they hate him. Think of this tweet. A modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had a start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. So all these facts are going to be contended. And people are jumping up and saying the United States didn't spend $350 billion, that Europe's money's not guaranteed. We don't know. I mean, this is the interesting thing about this information space. We don't know. And for me personally, it's not about the money. It's about fighting a war of discretion. If it's $1 and one person got killed, it violates my sense of moral right and wrong. We, as a republic, we are not an empire. We're not a democracy. We seek the truth. What is the moral and just thing to do? It is not moral and just based on our Constitution and how this country was framed. It's not moral and just to fight wars of discretion. Wars of national defense, of course that's moral and just. You know, when you're taught to fight by people who are real good at it, there's two kinds of fighting. There's self-defense, and then there's being a soldier. Soldiers kill. And the best of the soldiers back in the day before there was, you know, weapons guns, before guns, when it was swords. At that time when there was swords, it was really considered déclassé to to take your sword out of your scabbard first. That was a real admission of low skill. The highest skilled swordsmen unsheathed their swords after they were attacked, and then they won. Of course, when we move into the period of the gun, the great equalizer, things have changed. But when you're taught by very skilled people how to fight, you always are taught to block first. Don't attack other people. Block first, because the whole art of self-defense is about defense. That's why they call it self-defense, not self-offense. Don't be offensive. And that's what we are right now. We're offensive. And Donald Trump is trying to rein that in, which I think is great. And for the people that are in the Republican Party of Minnesota and they're pro-Ukraine war, hey, guess what? You lost. You lost. You lost that battle. You lost it. We've elected a president that is obviously against this war. What are you going to do in the Republican Party of Minnesota? What are you going to do? That's my question. Are we going to have unity? I've been getting preached unity for a long time. Are we going to have unity with a new president and his agenda? I just, inquiring minds want to know. And the answer is, of course we're not. These people are going to work to subvert the president's agenda. At first, it'll be very stealthy, and later on, it'll become more and more overt. That is why if we want a peaceful and prosperous country, we need to get involved in the political process. Period. End of story. Let's listen to Pete Hegseth, number 2.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. As part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Isn't that cool? What a change. That is a giant sea change. Giant. In American foreign policy and our orientation to how this war started. And let me tell you what happened when Pete Hegseth made that speech. Defense industry stocks plummeted. They plummeted because investors understand that we're moving away from a wartime economy. Because President Trump's not about war, he's about peace. We've just spent 20 years. Bush, 2000 and Bush started the deal. You could say Clinton started the deal. You could say George H.W. Bush started the deal. In fact, my entire life, it's been war after war, Vietnam War, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, Afghanistan. I mean, it's just been a constant war, just war. And President Trump, I really believe, because I'm looking at what's happening in the news and behind the scenes, is making the moves to get us off the brink of nuclear war. I think that's great. They offered President Zelensky an interesting deal. I thought this was worth talking about just for a second, because Trump, being a businessman, he's saying, hey, we're putting all these billions of dollars into this country. What's the benefit for the American people? What are we getting out of the deal? Because, the previous group, the benefit was the grift that's associated with the military-industrial complex, and the grift that's associated with maintaining the illusion that democracy is the finest form of governance in world history, when in fact, this is a republic. And there's a huge difference between republicanism and the philosophy that underlies the idea of democracy. Republicanism makes you and me the sovereign of our own lives. We are the kings and queens of our own lives. We don't believe as Republicans that doing the wrong thing is right if most of the people agree with it. No, we stand on a moral and just tradition of Western culture. We know right from wrong. But democracy, which is a devolution of republicanism, believes that if you have 50% of the people plus one vote, anything's okay. And that's why we live in a society that is so demoralized. I'll say it again, demoralized, because we've been voting for things that are demoralizing. It's by intent. It's by intent. What kind of politician stands up and advocates for things that are bad for the health and well-being of the people? I mean, I'm not saying people aren't going to get high. They're going to get high. Dogs will get high out in the nature. Animals like to alter their consciousness. I get that. Why are we legalizing it? I mean, come on. And let me tell you why we're legalizing it. Money. The corrupter of the entire system is money. So we're Republicans. We're not Democrats. And Trump, looking at this thing, he's going, hey, democracy? We're going to war. Millions of people are dying to defend democracy. Hey, at least let's do it for some cash, because he's a businessman. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with his idea, but it's definitely a departure from previous, 75 years of U.S. foreign policy, because the money changed hands behind the scenes. It wasn't like we were doing this out of the goodness of our hearts. We weren't. There was always a quid pro quo, but it was hidden from you and I. All we heard was the Truman Doctrine. We're going to go defend democracy all over the world, even if the Democrat is a dictator like El-Sisi of Egypt. If it suits our foreign policy and there's money in it, yes. That's why we've been doing it for 75 years. It's always been about the money and control. Always. Trump just let us see it. And I think he did it to let us see it. I think he is more transparent. They're trying to say he's some kind of dictator, and he's wearing his heart on his sleeve. Hey, you want us to defend you? We want half the action. Like the mafia up front, right? We've had a mafia running our country for years, decades, but when they come up on the screen, they're perfectly regaled in perfect business suits. They got a beautiful wife. They got kids. They've never been divorced. They got the American flag on their lapel pin. And they've been robbing us and robbing the world. And we're just starting to get our minds wrapped around it. So those same people are saying to me that President Trump is about to rob the world, that it's his corruption. No. He's a billionaire. He doesn't need your money or my money. He's already got the cash. He's just showing us how the game is played transparently and out in the light of day. You want us to support you? You want us to potentially die for you? Frog up there, partner. We want half the action. No different than the mafia would walk into a laundromat and find the owner and say, hey, we'll protect you, but we're going to come by every Friday. We want our piece of the action. That's what government is, okay? So let's just understand that when you have a government like this, that's what it is. That's why it's so important for us to have President Trump's back and get into this process, because it doesn't have to be like this. President Trump, he's got to cover his ass here. He's got to protect himself. And this is part of doing it. It's called plausible deniability. And if we happen to get half the rare earth in the Ukraine, hey, good. He wins either way. So Hegseth has dropped the bomb that there's going to be no NATO membership for Ukraine, reversing the comments of George W. that Ukraine should be in NATO, which is crazy. Was crazy when he said it. I remember watching him say that and thinking to myself, oh, that's not going to end well. And of course, it didn't. That's why how this war started is another issue to be contested. It's another issue. If like in a hockey fight, right? They're skating down the rink and somebody gets slashed. And then the guy that gets slashed stops, throws his gloves on the rink, and starts fighting with the guy that slashed him. The slash might not be detected, but when you take your gloves off and fight, you're going to the penalty box. Kind of like that. It's an interesting way to think about it. Well, let's just listen to how these people's heads are blowing off. Could you please play Tanner number 3? And we're going to stop as we go through this.
But first, here's my take. It's been a head-spinning week for American foreign policy, with tariffs against Canada and Mexico dramatically announced and then suddenly postponed. USAID was gutted, and President Trump said he wants the US to take over Gaza. The most revealing lens through which to look at all this might not be Donald Trump's pronouncements, but rather those of his aides and supporters. The tariff tantrum suggested that foreign leaders are becoming skilled at handling Trump. They mollify him with token concessions, allow him to declare victory, and then return to business as usual.
You stop,
the
please.
Concessions.
Okay, this guy is a very educated man, if I remember correctly, went to Princeton. Further, I think he was involved in a secret society, one of the 3 secret societies. Maybe he was from Yale. Anyhow, he's East Coast, Ivy League. He's not a dumb man. He just doesn't have the frame of reference to understand what's going on. People are saying, like Fareed, that President Trump is under the thumb of Vladimir Putin. Nobody said that about Richard Nixon when he lured the Chinese away from Russia in 1972. It was the same thing, but President Nixon had exceptional bona fides as an anti-communist. So when he sent Kissinger to China in 72, and they promised the Chinese entry into Western markets, we're going to make you rich, just quit being with the Russians, and that worked magnificently for decades. Nobody accused Nixon of being on the payroll of the Chinese. President Trump doesn't have that kind of history because he's a businessman. He's not a rabid anti-communist. He's been doing business all over the world. These people don't understand this because they've never done business, okay? They're just pundits. So the fact that President Trump is luring the Russians away from the Chinese and breaking the Iron Triangle, which we've talked about many times, the alliance between Russia, China, and Iran. He's broken it already. We're restoring full diplomatic relations with the Russians, and they're already talking about bringing the Russians back into the G7 meetings and allowing the Russians and American people to do business. This is brilliant because it is isolating the Chinese. Fareed Zakaria is still living in the 1972 paradigm of that global world order. We got a new world order. He just hasn't figured it out. And likewise, he can't figure out these tariffs. He thinks these tariffs have gone away, that these foreign leaders have mollified President Trump. No, President Trump is only preparing the markets for what's going to come very soon. Let's continue.
That Mexico and Canada made were either small bore or policies that they were already pursuing. Mexico agreed to send thousands of troops to the border at the Biden administration's request, and are now doing the same for Trump. In the case of Canada, Trump's own statement notes that Canada was agreeing to implement its border plan, much of which had been announced over a month ago. Some conservative commentators pointed out the obvious. In the words of a Wall Street Journal editorial, Trump blinks. The Fox anchor Laura Ingraham implied that the president caved to huge negative reaction from markets, saying, "I'm not too impressed about the concessions from Canada." Canadian media reactions were similar. Canada's CTV News published an article with the headline, "Canada Takes a Stand and Donald Trump Blinks." The country's satirical show, 22 Minutes, has a Donald Trump look-alike declaring victory.
I did the impossible. I made peace with Canada and ended the unjust trade war that I started. I'm signing this executive order. I did not lose, but I totally won the trade war order.
Of course, from J.D. Vance to Mike Johnson, Republicans fell over themselves to praise the stunning negotiating powers of President Trump. The Trump effect is in full force, Johnson posted. At this rate of achievement, wrote Elon Musk, not only should President Donald Trump be on Mount Rushmore, I want to personally work the chisel. With the
Can you stop it, please, Tanner? So we're going to hold on to this clip, and we're going to play it when all this stuff becomes obvious. Because it's obvious to me what's going on. And this guy has got a big platform, super educated. He's making fun of Donald Trump. And these people are completely unprepared intellectually and emotionally to deal with this change. They can't get their minds wrapped around it. They're caught in a paradigm. That paradigm is the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. They can't let go of it because that's how they make their money. And their paradigm it's toast. It's already toast. It's done. It's over. Now we're in an unknown zone. I was just talking to Tanner. Tanner, you had an interesting comment. He's saying, boy, all of our trust in things, it's breaking down. Remember you said that as we walked in the studio today?
Yeah, I was just struggling with trust in anything that I'm seeing.
Okay, this happens from time to time. When your government is robbing and stealing at this kind of an intergalactic level, when people have become so demoralized that there's no right or wrong, it's just 50% plus one, and the smoking lamp is lit. When we've reached that point, and this could have gone on for many more decades until, tyranny became so oppressive that people just revolted with pitchforks and torches. Donald Trump came in, he is the counter-revolution, and he is exposing all of this. And boy, things have changed. And these pundits can't deal with it because their entire academic history, their entire work history, their entire output as scholars is based on supporting something that has been wiped away in 30 days. 30 days. And when something can be wiped out in 30 days, it's a house of cards. Generally speaking, a long con like we've been in, colonialism leads to inequality, therefore we have to have communism as an output. Climate change is caused by men, therefore we have to have communism as an output. Democracy, 50% plus one, we're voting for communism. Communism is the output. When communism is the output, and it's all based on lies, it's not hard to sweep it away. Let's finish Fareed.
Dismantling of USAID, Trump supporters scrambled to adjust. Secretary of State Marco Rubio quickly blasted the agency, saying it was out of control and unresponsive. This was the same agency that he had repeatedly posted in favor of over the years, written
Stop,
about in
please.
his...
Why, of course he did. He's a uniparty swamp creature. You know why he's Secretary of State? Because the whole Congress is a uniparty swamp creature. I posted on X today that the Congress, the Senate, the State House, they all need to go to the outhouse because that's where belongs. These people have not been calling this out. You know, if you're a Republican and you've been elected and you're in this mix and you vote no for something, but you don't call out the corruption, you're part of the corruption. And that's all of them, virtually all of them. Yes, there are a few noteworthy exceptions, a few, but in total, hey, voting no is not good enough when the people are being abused at this kind of intergalactic level. Let's continue.
In his book With Pride and Admiration, and recently recommended funding increases to President Biden. The pattern is now familiar and was followed after Trump's Gaza announcement. Those who had long supported Trump's determination to end America's military interventions cheered when he announced he would take over Gaza, send in troops if necessary, displace 2 million Palestinians to neighboring countries, and stay in Gaza for long-term ownership. Kayleigh McEnany responded.
You stop it for a second. So my entire life, we've had a conflict in the Middle East. I am not a supporter of genocide, and I have no idea what's going to happen there. But what President Trump is doing is he's isolating the Chinese. He's isolating the Chinese. The Gazans, the Palestinians there are funded by the Iranians. The iron triangle of Russia, Iran, and China. Iron because it can never be broken. He's breaking it. The existential threat to our country is the competition with China. He has said it is not the fault of the Chinese. It's the fault of our leadership. I know he does not seek war with the Chinese. He seeks new terms of engagement that are clear-eyed and forceful, defending the interests of me and you as American citizens. So they're breaking things up. We've had one kind of ongoing grift my entire lifetime. Well, something else is going to emerge. I don't know what it's going to be. These pundits don't know. Let's continue.
With this on Fox News.
President Trump is playing four-dimensional chess. You all are playing checkers.
Later that day, Trump officials began walking back key aspects of the president's plan, as did Trump himself. If you don't understand all this, you haven't played four-dimensional chess.
Look at him make
Trump's
fun.
White House
Stop.
is now.
Look at him make fun. I'm going to play this over and over, Fareed. To me, you look like a high schooler. Let's continue.
Now a court, and his courtiers scurry around, aware that the mercurial monarch might change his mind at any time. TikTok is terrible can suddenly become TikTok is great, and they need to pivot quickly. It reminds one of the court of Henry VIII, the monarch who went from being the greatest defender of the Catholic Church to a vicious opponent because he wanted a divorce that the Pope would not sanction. One man who refused to play the game, Sir Thomas More, had his head chopped off. The reason Trump forces aides and supporters to say things that they know are false is to enforce a regime in which loyalty is paramount, overriding facts, overriding your long-held convictions. Now, this might seem like an amusing spectacle, but there is a real cost. In the case of USAID, it will translate into death and despair for millions of the...
Yep, there you go. Death, despair, the children, disease. No, USAID has a cover story of some things that it did what was good. The majority of what it did was ridiculous. But see, they were smart. They got a cover story. You got to have a cover story when you're running a con. It's a con. A con is a trick. The trick includes elements that the marks can relate to. Oh, let's continue. Here comes the trick.
People on the planet. On trade, it remains a mystery as to why Trump singled out Canada. In the 2024 fiscal year...
Stop. It's not a mystery to me. I got a business in Canada. It's a communist country completely beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. They speak English. They look like Americans. That's not the way it rolls up there. And I know that because I've been up there many times, and you go up there, you think, oh, this is America. You know, Mexico and Canada are different countries. They have different cultures, and they are not favorable to the United States of America. They have other agendas. That's okay. That's fine. Just don't grift the American people. If you want to get money from us, please, let's be aligned. Just like his people in his administration, where loyalty is important. Darn straight it's important. Loyalty matters, particularly when you're fighting an entrenched bureaucracy that is 100% aligned to circumvent your policies. You need loyal people to get the job done, just like here in Minnesota, in the Minnesota GOP. These people are not loyal to Donald Trump and his agenda. They're just wearing MAGA hats and saying that they are. You know, that doesn't mean loyalty. That would mean duplicity. Let's continue.
Than 10% of migrant encounters happened at the Canadian border, and just 0.2% of fentanyl seizures occurred there. America runs a smaller trade deficit with Canada than with China or Vietnam. In fact, if you put aside Canadian crude oil, the US sells more to Canada than it buys from it. But the effect is clear. For Canada, the US is turning into an undependable ally, and it will try to lessen its reliance on America and search for new markets and friends, from Britain to China. The largest effect, though, is on American democracy. The scholar Francis Fukuyama has noted that the history of modern government has been a steady movement away from patrimonial rule, the rule of a single strongman to benefit his family and friends, towards rule by institutions and rules and norms. He notes that in the United States now, we are seeing the return to patrimonial rule, as citizens freely debating laws are replaced by supplicants begging the king to favor their interests.
Such BS. Rule of law has been subverted by lawyers who have graduated from communist law schools. They graduate from communist law schools, and they are communist law schools. They're the follow-up to 4 years of communist indoctrination. I was driving in the car with my stepson this week. I say, hey, man, what'd you learn at school today? You know, kind of a typical dad question, right?
Yeah.
And he was telling me about his class was called Human Geography. When you went to school, Tanner, did you have a class called Human Geography?
No, it was just geography.
Okay, well, now it's Human Geography. We didn't have Human Geography when I went to school. We had geography, right?
Yeah.
Human Geography. I said, what do you study there? And he started telling me what they were studying. It was a indoctrination curriculum for the New World Order, for the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. The teacher that day had been telling the class that Trump's tariffs were going to hurt poor people in China. What? Why would they be teaching that here in Minnesota? Well, I'll tell you, because the Minnesota curriculum is developed by the Minnesota Department of Education and the federal Department of Education, and they're jamming an ideology down the students' throats under the guise of education. Okay, great. This is what we're dealing with. Well, it's turning around. Let's listen to J.D. Vance addressing the Europeans.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
J.D. Vance urged European leaders to stop mass migration and curb progressive policies.
Many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy.
And not many days after that speech, the German so-called the Democrat Party their leftists were destroyed in an election with the center-right and the far-right parties taking control of Germany. Very interesting. Things are changing all over the world. But we have our forever warriors. Some things don't change very quickly. In Syria, the U.S.-backed Kurdish SDF, Syrian Defense Force, has agreed to integrate into the new army, the new Syrian army led by Jolani. It's very interesting. Kind of means since Jolani, HTS was a Al-Qaeda offshoot, and now the SDF, which is backed by the U.S., they're coming together. Kind of seems like there's a little integration there between the Kurds and the Al-Qaeda people, and they are Al-Qaeda people rebranded. And the Turks, they're not buying it. We thought they were on our team. They're continuing to attack the SDF. Well, hey, forever warriors. There's going to have to be a solution here also. Apparently the solution is the Kurds are going to be part of Syria, and somebody's going to have to sit the Turks down and tell them, stand down. But that's not today. There's more weapons to use and more contracts to be fulfilled. The globalists are still a threat. The Europeans are still meeting, talking about continuing this war in the Ukraine if the United States withdraws. And you know, that's fine. You guys want to fight the Russians? Fine. What President Trump has told the Europeans is, if we don't end this in 3 weeks, he gave them 3 weeks. If you don't end this in 3 weeks, if you don't agree, because the peace deal is already in the can. Now it's just everybody getting their minds wrapped around it. If they don't agree in 3 weeks, the United States is going to withdraw from NATO and withdraw from Europe. That's what they're facing. So we'll see what they do. You know, we're in this unknown zone. There's no predictions in here. None. Zero. And Netanyahu, of course, in Israel, because the globalists are still a threat, is lobbying the United States government to finish the job against Iran. And there seems to be quite a bit of movement in that direction. Bring Russia into the West, destroy this Iranian regime, either by toppling it and having the new regime come forth, or just bombing them into the Stone Age. And then China's going to be standing there all alone, having to make a deal. That's where we're at today. In our own continent, right here in Minnesota or wherever you live, I just want you to know that in your neighborhood, there is a very pervasive and very caustic effect from the Mexican cartels who trade in everything, even in tires. They smuggle tires across the southern border, making it very hard for the tire dealers. You know, there's very onerous taxes on tires made in China. They're not supposed to be coming in the country. They're coming across that border every day. I know it. It's very hard to be honest and fight against fraud. It's very difficult. And there's drugs and human trafficking. Awful, awful, awful things are going on. And the United States has designated the cartels in Mexico foreign terrorist organization. Elon Musk claims that because they have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations, these cartels are now, quote unquote, eligible for drone strikes. The United States military is going into Mexico. Strap them on because it's going to be unprecedented in our lifetime. We, the people, have made a decision by electing Donald Trump to reduce, we're not going to end it, but to reduce the divisive influence of cartel money in our country. And where does that money go? Mostly to the politicians. That's where it goes, as far as how it affects our lives. Well, all these changes, and what's the predominant change? We're lessening the intervention of government in our daily life because President Trump is restoring republicanism. This is not the post-World War II Democrat liberal order anymore. It's going to be something else. Now, I don't know what it's going to be. I posted on Getter and X a short, and I said, who is Donald Trump? It was fine on X. On Getter, about 95% of the people were okay with it, but about 5% of the people didn't like it, that I would even question, where is this policy going? Because I really don't know. So I'm going to say unity and loyalty is necessary. The dark side of unity and loyalty is slavery, blind faith. That's a slippery slope in there. And I'm going to be the first person when I see things to call them out. And there's lots of things I want to call out. I'm worried about the technocracy. I'm worried about it. I'm worried about it. I'm worried about it. I want us to live a balanced life where we have the search for truth and technology much more balanced so that the well-being, the health and well-being of every citizen is therefore enhanced. I'm worried about a lot of things. I'm worried about the comments about the Gaza. I'm worried about it. But it's too soon to make judgments or to make criticism because the policies are not yet released. You got to read the bills. You got to see what are these people really doing because they write it down. All we got to do is read it. And the economy is really a big deal now. And as a transition to the economy, I want to thank Kathy Hagan, who I'm going to mention by name. She made a beautiful donation to Free People. Thank you, Kathy. People can donate you can get in touch with me at support@target.com. And if you want to make a donation, we need it. We're not making money. We're trying to expand the programming. If we got rich doing this, I'm not a communist. We're not to that point. You can go to locals on the Free People Radio website, make a donation there. There's the Free People store. And please, the next time you need tires, go to tireget.com. 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 It's perfect. It's a perfect way to buy tires. You got to buy your tires from someone. When you buy them from Target, you're supporting the movement. And for that, we thank you very much. And that's a transition into our economy. And the ass is going to fall off the donkey. Get ready for it because they're going to blame it all on Trump. Trump, it's all Trump's fault. And you hear it from these elected Democrats that President Trump promised to bring down inflation, and we're a month into his administration and inflation's supposed to be down. These people, they suck, and they know that the people are generally not paying attention. And they know that the people are concerned about the amount of money that they're paying for things. This is a lot bigger than money. This is about human freedom, about the future of our country. And the economy is in the pit. It's in the pit because, for example, in the first 4 months of the 2025 fiscal year, a record $840 billion was the deficit. In 4 months, what's 800? What's 8 times 3? That's 2.4. So that would mean if we stay in the current pace this fiscal year, in peacetime, we're going to run up a $2.4 trillion deficit that has to be funded by the issuance of debt or the monetization of more fiat currency. The interest payment on the debt is $1.2 trillion. So the government is in competing with companies like mine to borrow money. I don't have a chance. The interest rates are high. Consumption is low. People are freaked out. And then President Trump is cutting off all the candy. All this money that's flowing to these NGOs and these charitable organizations that are all misused. It's all grift. Still gets spent. The guy that's making $400,000 a year sitting in an office by himself running some charitable organization and taking $100,000 off the top and giving it to every Democrat legally, he still has $300,000. He goes out and buys himself a new car, buys a new house, buys his girlfriend a new Gucci purse. That money's cut off. Cut off. That's a big change. There's lots of things that are being rejiggered in the economy now. There's less cash rolling around, sloshing around, and we feel it in the economy. We feel it. But the main thing is the high interest rates have just sapped the consumer. Just sapped them. The inflation, the high interest rates, were tapped. Tap out time. I could go through all these charts. It's really just meaningless. The charts are meaningless. What means something is President Trump is a businessman and he knows how to put the economy back together. But before we do that, let's just take a look at 12 reasons why the economy is screwed. Since the year 2000 and Bush, Mr. Globalist, our nation has lost 70,000 manufacturing workshops and over 5 million manufacturing jobs. In July 1979, 19.5 million Americans had manufacturing jobs. Today, only 12.8 million, that's 7 million jobs that got lost, even though our population is far larger than it was in 79. According to a survey that was recently conducted by Pew Research, 59% of Americans believe that the United States has lost more than it has gained from the free trade regime. Number 4, in 1959, manufacturing represented 28% of all U.S. economic output. It's now down to 11.5%. Number 5, more than 1 billion cell phones are sold worldwide each year, but only a few thousand of them are manufactured here in the United States. Number 6, the size of our trade deficit with China in 2024 was $300 billion. 7, at this point, China produces approximately 4 times as many vehicles as the United States does annually. Number 8, in the early days of the semiconductor industry, 100% of semiconductors were manufactured here in the United States. Today, it's only 8%. Number 9, Russia is producing 3 times as many artillery shells as the United States and Europe combined. Number 10, the United States spends approximately $3 on Chinese goods for every $1 that is spent on goods sent to China from the United States. 11, our stores are absolutely overflowing with products that are made in China. Meanwhile, soybeans are the number one export from the U.S. to China. Number 12, the one that hurts the most. More than 36 million Americans now live in poverty. 36 million Americans live in poverty. Homeless in the United States is at an all-time record high. Demand at food banks is at record levels. Economy is not doing good. And of course, part of it is if these allegations are fraud are true, this is going to be the biggest fraud in human history. This robbing and stealing that is alleged to be ongoing. Now, Minnesota officials are all taking and the same thing in your state. Go look up at what your elected representatives are saying about the first 30 days of the Trump administration. All the Democrats are saying he's a demagogue, and most of the Republicans are saying great things about him. I found it interesting here in Minnesota that 2 of our 4 elected Congress people, GOP Representative Brad Finstead of CD1 and Michelle Fischbach of CD7, they didn't have any comments when they were asked. Isn't that brave of them? These kind of people got to go. You know, Min GOP isn't going to like me saying this, but I just have a very simple strategic outlook about this. We're going to get this done in 4 years or we're not. The people that don't have the courage to do it need to go. We need courageous people in every seat because we're fighting communism and they're not kidding around. So why are we? Why isn't Representative Finstead and Michelle Fischbach commenting to the Communist Star Tribune and telling the people of Minnesota how they feel about Donald Trump? And it's very simple. Rather than fearing Republicans, they're more afraid of the communists in their district. That's who they are. They were asked to comment, and they didn't do it. Tom Emmer commented, had really great things to say about President Trump. But these two, their cowardice is noteworthy. Well, when it comes to cowardice, you know, you have to understand, and we as a group, we've been working on, and when I say you have to understand, I'm talking about our elected officials who are watching me and don't like me. You know, some of you are dumber than dirt. You just are. I'm not saying you're dumb as a person. I'm saying about how we got to where we are. What's going on here? Some of you just don't care about history or philosophy. It's not your thing. How you got elected? Because your constituents don't care either, and you're not interested in educating them because you don't know yourself. But for the elected representatives that are tuning in, let me just say, it's actually quite simple to analyze what President Trump is doing. President Trump has analyzed, and he's got a lot of very smart people around him. They've analyzed what the sales pitch is and the policy pitch is of the communists. Communism has always sought worldwide domination. You know, workers of the world unite. It didn't work. So guess how this mantle got picked up? It's corporations of the world unite. Corporations of the world unite. The outcome is still communism. Why do they want communism? Our elected representatives need to ask themselves. Why? Because a communist regime has complete control of the population. The population is dependent on the communist. That is the complete and total repudiation of republicanism, where every citizen is sovereign. Man, that's messy. They don't want the citizens in the Republican Party of Minnesota or the Republican Party of whatever state you're living in, because it's very hard to manage free people that have opinions. It's messy. Unpredictable things happen when free people show up to self-govern. They don't want it. I've been to so many meetings of the Republican Party that have just devolved into fighting because the established apparatus is seeking to stop citizens from being involved in the party process. So I'm going to say to the elected representatives, if you want to win my support, just start asking the citizens to join the party. Because when you do that, I know you're with the people. If you're with the apparatus, we're going to work tirelessly to retire you because you're not representing the people. You got your own interests. How can you do that? You're a public servant. If the people want republicanism because they're Republicans, don't we have to know what republicanism is? And here's what it is. Your constituents are the kings and queens of their own lives. You work for them. I know you don't like to hear that because you enjoy your job in show business, being the boss. But that's not the way it is. That's upside down. And there's more and more citizens that are figuring this out. So please, you professionals, you can feel which way the wind is blowing. Just fold in with us so we can have unity. Let's let the citizens into the party and let's self-govern together. Let's show the communists what it means when everybody is in charge of their own lives. That's number one. But number two, let's know what the communists are selling. And how do they win? How do they subvert the will of the people? How do they create the kids to be communists? Well, number one, when we're in first grade and it's cold outside, and Dan Schultz used this on the last episode, I thought it was a good analogy, good metaphor. And the teacher said, kids, it's very cold outside. Who wants to go outside today for recess? And the kids have a vote. And if more people want to go outside than stay inside, everybody goes outside. So that's a very natural thing. Let's have a vote. Democracy. So democracy, when republicanism is not taught as the superordinate organizing ideology of our democracy, they just teach democracy 50% plus one, then people want to be part of the 50% plus one. They want that. They don't care about republicanism. They are taught to be part of the mob, which then becomes part of the communal communist population as things devolve away from self-governance. How do they get you there, though? They scare you. They scare me. They say, number one, that because of colonialism, there's inequalities that have to be addressed, and that if we don't address these inequalities, our society is not sustainable. Remember, for these old people like me, hey, Tanner, sustainability for me when I was your age, you know what that was?
What?
It was putting banana peels in a recycling bin. Now sustainability is we have to have equitable outcomes so that our society can be sustained. You see, they kind of spun it into a new kind of a headspace. They moved it from banana peels to equitable outcomes. And that's what all this DEI is about. That's what the human geography class is about that my stepson has taken. It's about equitable outcomes. Equitable outcomes is communism. But it makes so much sense to people that, things are not fair. Let's fix it. And where's my Republican leadership standing up about this, which we're going to talk about in a second. And the one that really is our ass is energy. Energy. Human beings are destroying the planet with man-made climate change. Probably the biggest con in human history. Because the scientific evidence is unclear, yet we have organized every level of governance to decarbonize, which does what? It makes our society poor, easy to manage. And, concomitantly, when you go to windmills and solar panels, you're using up farmland to do it. Not only are you cold or hot, depending on where you live, because, those kind of energy strategies don't work, but you're hungry. So you're cold, you're hungry, and you're dependent. The perfect outcome for communists. Now, where have the Republicans been these last, forever on these issues? Well, here in Minnesota just yesterday, State Senator Julia Coleman made a very bold statement on X that all of the state Senate Republican caucus is supportive of clean energy. Why? Why would you say that? Who are you catering to? Your president, Julia, just said that it's the Green New Scam. So apparently here in Minnesota, and maybe in your state also, the elected Republicans are catering to the communists instead of standing up and being unified with the president. Okay, now we get down to the pith of the problem. Like here in Minnesota, Xcel Energy, the first energy company to decarbonize under the leadership of Ben Folk, who happens to be the husband of Kathy Folk, who I'm running against for a Republican Party position this coming Saturday. The folks took in $155 million of compensation in 10 years, $15 million a year to decarbonize Xcel Energy. The state of Minnesota put in hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, of state subsidies that we, the people, gave them to decarbonize. Where were our Republican elected officials? They're still saying they support this. They're catering to the communists. They don't care if I freeze to death, and they don't care about President Trump, and they don't care about the Republican agenda, which A.K. Kamara came on this show last week and said the RNC is fully committed to implementing President Trump's agenda and supporting him. And here we have in my district, SD 45, Alex Plekish lives in my district, the chairman of the Republican Party, 2 times supported Kathy Folk in 2 losing Senate campaigns where she refused to support President Trump on record, on tape. Alex Plekish, chairman of the party, should you not, as a member of the RNC, disavow her candidacy and endorse me, since she is clearly not a Trump supporter? Wouldn't that solidify you as a Trump supporter and show that you've changed in your heart and your mind who you are? Because I remember when you called me and asked me to work against President Trump, which I'm sure you're going to deny. But that's a he said, she said thing. Let's leave that out. I have Kathy Folk on tape saying she will not publicly support Donald Trump. Alex Plekish, will you endorse me for the role of SD 45 chairman of the committee? It's a very simple question. This is called unity, a new kind of unity, a different kind of unity. But if President Trump is our president and he's going for this, which he is changing the Truman Doctrine, which since 1946 has said that our country will defend a democracy anywhere in the world. Well, hey, guess what? In the United Nations, our United Nations representative voted we voted with the Russians. I mean, that's what happened. We would not condemn the Russians as the aggressor in that war in the Ukraine. So for the first time since 1946, our government is not supporting quote-unquote democracies all over the world. In fact, President Trump called Zelensky a dictator, which is the title of tonight's episode, number 185. Number 2, every DEI initiative that it was implemented during the Biden administration, President Trump is undoing them with executive orders and hopefully at some point with legislation. I just watched a clip. We should play this clip Thursday, where he was in a lunch with the governors, and the governor of Maine stood up. He asked the governor, "Are you going to keep men out of women's sports in Maine?" And the governor said, "I'm going to follow federal and state law." And the president said, well, first he said, and then he said, "We're the federal law." And he said, "I'm coming after you. I'm cutting the cash off." And she said, I'll see you in court. And he said, yes, we will. So he is boldly undoing this DEI initiative. Are we doing that here in Minnesota or in your state? Are we boldly going where no Republican has had the brass to go before? And then you get down to this energy thing. Oh my goodness. That's the core of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, that human beings are destroying the planet. And there's all this evidence, which is sketch. And I am not a PhD in climatology. I can't sort it out. It's just very simple for me. My T-shirt, I'd rather die from a tornado than a tyrant. It's very simple. If the problem is climate change and the outcome is communism, I'd rather die from a tornado. I'd rather die from a tornado. That's just me. Okay? If the solution, now there's so many other solutions. For example, Minnesota Republicans, the $1 billion or whatever the number was, which I couldn't figure it out, somewhere between 600 million and 1.5 billion of subsidies that Xcel has received so far to decarbonize. And there's another almost $6 billion of tax credits that are coming to Xcel from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act to keep the price of energy down here, which President Trump, if he has his way, that money's not coming. Imagine what we're going to be paying for electricity if the cavalry of that $6 billion doesn't come. Woo! That's going to change hearts and minds, isn't it? Look at all the money that's gone into this from government. Why couldn't all this money just go to ending public utilities? Why do I have to be dependent on Xcel Energy? If you're going to give all this money to the public utility, why don't you just give it to the individual citizens so that we all could get off the grid and have our own energy sources? I mean, that's not hard to understand. The technology is certainly there. But what you've done in combination with the communists is you set up a massive scam of government dependency, reducing the acreage to grow food. Oh, thank you very much. And then I look at the votes. And I say, oh, like Julia Coleman, perfectly constructed candidate, or Jim Nash, looked up his votes. Perfectly, every vote, no, just like a good Republican should. Where was the screaming about the fraud? You two, Nash and Coleman, you've both put forward bills now, like Doge bills in Minnesota, as if they're going to pass and get on Tim Walz's desk and signed into law. It's pure theater. We don't need bills for you leadership people to start calling out this fraud and abuse. It's easy. Just investigate it, go before the people and say, we've discovered this, we've discovered that. I've discovered that the folks took in $155 million in 10 years. Wouldn't we say that's somewhat abusive of the public purse for a public utility? What is a public utility? It's a monopoly that's granted a monopoly by government and is now regulated by what's called a Public Utilities Commission. Where's the utility commissioners? And the new guy, Frenzel, he's been in there for 3 years. He's already taken in $35 million of personal compensation. Are these people worth this kind of money? I run a business. I bet I could do it for $500,000. And that's a lot of money. I mean, you got an input, you got a product, and you got customers. That's it. And you got a monopoly? Whoa. You don't have to compete with anybody. You got an input, raw materials. Your factory turns it into an output, which is energy, and then you got customers. That's what you got. And you got $15 million a year, Ben Folk, for operating that. Wow. Genius. Your genius was getting the billions of dollars of subsidies from government. That was the genius. And contributing to every Democrat politician up and down the line. So, Kathy, if you don't want to hear this in public, withdraw today. Because I don't want to do it to you in front of all your friends and neighbors. They don't watch the Professor Penn podcast. You do. So if you don't want to have this publicly announced, so all your friends and neighbors will know what grifters you people are, just withdraw. And then, well, we will not talk about the folks. You all can move to Florida, along with all the other failed politicians in the Republican Party who lose, and move to warmer and sunnier places. Abandon the state. Abandon it. So many names come to mind. So many faces come to mind. People that ran away, as if you can run away from communism by going to Florida or North Carolina. But since you guys ran away, hey, no reason to mention your name. You're off the playing field. I'm only interested in the people that are still playing. And for those of you that are now hating me, let me just say this. There's more people like me coming. I am just one of the shock troops, so to speak. I am not doing this to be liked. I'm not doing this to win an office. I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing this to stay alive. I'm doing this because I know if the communists come back in 4 years, they're going to be putting Republicans on gulags. Even you, Julia Coleman and Jim Nash, they're going to round up everybody. And why do I know it? Because my family's lived through it. And all you got to do is go on TikTok and start looking at the shorts these people are putting up. Hey, are you seeing any of these very violent, threatening shorts from people on TikTok? Tanner, are you seeing any of those?
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, like people going on and saying Donald Trump should be shot and the Republicans should be killed.
Oh yeah, I've seen like sneaky, yeah.
Crazy,
I've seen
isn't
that.
it?
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, like, would you like to, does any of them stick out in your mind you'd like to share?
No, I usually, well, it's always code worded. I think the last one that I kind of watched that was kind of funny was this cute winter boots thing. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
There was a huge trend on TikTok, and there's probably still protests going on right now, but they would communicate over TikTok by using the term cute winter boots. Because then the idea is that in the algorithm, people just think they're shopping, but they're really communicating like protests.
Okay.
Yeah. But that I don't know. Other than that, I always laugh at the wording, I guess. They can't, on TikTok, you can't say like, oh, let's kill someone or let's do this.
Oh, I got a whole bunch of them to play.
On TikTok?
Oh, hell yes.
Ah, I don't know.
I'm
Then I
gonna,
guess
I'm
I'm
gonna,
not
I
seeing
am gonna
those.
create myself a montage of these threatening shorts, and you got to take these people at their word, because when you start threatening people with death, I mean that's a real thing. That's real. So you look at the history of communism throughout the world. Every time communists have gotten in control, a genocide has soon followed thereafter. Their estimates when the Soviets took control was the Bolsheviks, not the Soviets, it was the Bolsheviks. When they got control of Russia and in at the beginning of the regime, there was maybe between 10 and 20 million Christians that were killed. There was a tremendous famine that was intentionally caused in Ukraine. Maybe 4 to 6 million people died. There was a huge gulag system set up where millions of people were interned. Most of them, I don't know if it was most of them, a lot of them died. Same thing happened in China. Same thing happened in Cambodia. You know, this kind of thing where communism gets full control. And why am I talking about it when we have President Trump in there? Because we're not being involved as American citizens. If we don't go do this, if we don't, first of all, join me every Friday night, 8 p.m. Central at Dan Schultz 2, and let's get in the party. If you're in Minnesota, let's aggregate in the party. Let's get together. Let's form a digital army. Let's get it done. We got a year before caucus. We can get 10,000 new people going to caucus. If we do that all throughout the country, 5 to 10,000 new players in every state, we got a shot. We can't even promise ourselves that if we get control of the Republican Party, we're going to save the republic. That is a promise. That's too far. But if we don't get control of the party, and these Roger Wicker types, these Cornyn types, I could just keep naming them. Man, there are so many of these neocon warhawk, neohawk. It's a new word. There's so many of these people banging around in the party, and they're all wearing MAGA hats, and they're all speaking favorably about the president. And what their agenda is to make sure that the Democrat liberal order is not dead. It's just taking a break, and it's going to rear its head and come back And we're going to have to make a decision about this in SD 45 on Saturday. You know, if you listen to me and you're a delegate and you're mad, I'm sorry. If we weren't so horribly divided and people weren't so completely full of shit, I wouldn't have to be strident. People lie. When you sit in that room and you look around that room, it's not really between me and Kathy Folk. It's between an anti-Trumper, and it's not about Trump for me. It's about his ideas. It's about the ideas of the new movement. I supported these ideas before Trump came down the elevator in 2015. It's about the ideas. So you got a group in that room that don't want this change, that don't want Trump to succeed, but they're all wearing MAGA hats and they're all acting like they do. But 3 months ago, they weren't supporting Trump. Oh, I supported him in my heart. I heard that. I support him in my heart. What does that mean? What that means is you're either lying to the people whose doors you're knocking on when they ask you about Trump and you say, I don't want to talk about it. I'm here by myself, for myself, or you're lying to the delegates. I don't know who you're lying to, Kathy, but you're lying. And the essence of republicanism is we don't lie to each other and we don't lie to ourselves. For example, remember George Washington? He could not tell a lie. That's because he was a Republican. Remember Abraham Lincoln? We called him Honest Abe. That's because he was a Republican. Now, I'm not talking about the puffery of sales or exaggerating or this, that, thus, and so. Human beings make mistakes. I'm talking about with knowledge of forethought, lying to manipulate people. Man, it chokes me up. I'm talking about knowledgeably, with forethought, lying to manipulate people. That's not Republican. Grifting off the people is not Republican. George Washington was against the formation of political parties because he knew what was going to happen when these parties formed. Well, hey, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle, but we can, as Republicans, start to rediscover what it is, not as a party, but as a lifestyle, as a political philosophy that one lives their life by. And that is a philosophy that is based on a 5,700-year tradition of monotheism, is based on a set of moral imperatives that developed over thousands of years, is based on the idea that we are the sovereigns of our own lives and that we protect the rights of every citizen. If we rediscover this philosophy, we will be individually redeemed and we will redeem our country. So this is more than a political dispute. This is about the future of our nation and the future of us as individuals. Will we have health and well-being, peace and prosperity, or will we be ruled by tyrants because we've destroyed the planet and that's the only way to fix the inequities of colonialism? When you actually think about it, it sounds ridiculous. Yet, if Kathy Folk had been elected to the Senate, she would have voted with the Senate Republicans like Julia Coleman for clean energy. And if she loses, which she did, the Democrat who won will vote for clean energy with the Senate Republicans and maintain this grift that's going on all throughout our country, aimed at leaving us cold or hot and hungry, depending on where we live. This is something President Trump wants to change. It's about revealing the long con. It's about getting honest again with each other. It's about restoring our republic. Let's quit talking about democracy and start talking about republicanism. Let's get back to basics. Let's rebuild our state. And let us do it by asking the people in every state, please come into the party and let the party officers serve you. We work for you. And on that note, I want to thank you for being here tonight. I'm a little bit worked up because I'm coming to grips with all this corruption and all this tomfoolery. And I want to share my indignation, my righteous indignation, with you, my audience. So thank you. Spread out the podcast. Join us on X. Let's get this digital army going. We've got the means to save our country. Thank you very much, and God willing, I'll see you on Thursday night.
Have a good night, everybody.